Second, Wills.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. It's unanimous. Presentation of bills. Is there a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Second, Adjourn.
All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? The motion passes. It's unanimous. The consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
Move to approve, Wilson.
Second, Weedman.
All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? The motion passes. Which brings us to the public hearing for the proposed budget for the 2021-22 fiscal school year. This is the time and place for the public hearing and for meeting on the matter of approving the 2021-22 Dallas Center Grimes Community School Certified Budget. Are there any questions, comments, or objections from those present? Did we have any individuals that registered their intent to speak during the public hearing?
No one registered their intent to speak or filed any objections.
I declare the hearing on the approving the 2021-22 certified budget to be closed. Which brings us to written reports. Are there any questions on the written reports? If not, that takes us, did you want to comment?
I did want to acknowledge the, our feedback or our work for the diversity committee or with the cabinet. We're going to be putting that through our updates. We feel if there's information to provide to the full group, we'll present it at the board meetings. Pretty detailed plan. Looking forward to the work for our cabinet. But also understand that just because we're working at the cabinet level does not mean we have building level as well as curriculum that's always continually working on diversity in the classroom and part of our process as a district.
And Scott, maybe just one question on that. It looked like kind of a multi-month plan, but really the next time we should expect to maybe see something substantive on that would be maybe October, where they bring maybe the full recommendation for what that plan looks like. Did I kind of gather that correctly?
Yeah, that's correct. And then also when we're updating to get kind of a district level committee together as well.
Great, thanks.
I don't know, for what it's worth, I really appreciated the diversity and inclusion plan. I guess I thought it was really deliberate, transformative. I guess I really liked what was put forward. I guess we're up to building level reports. So Diane and April.
All right, so I'm not sure if anyone noticed, but this has not been a typical year for us. And so, but you might recognize on the screen our district model. And when April and I were getting ready to talk about coming here tonight, we thought, you know, this is something that's really provided some foundation for us over the year. So even though it's not normal business as the way we've done it before, this kept us really grounded as we were moving forward with our work. So we talk a lot about CERT, and we, again, took a look at these categories as we started to roll out what our year was going to look like with the pandemic. So curriculum was definitely going to be a huge focus for us. We knew that we had to provide an environment that was safe for adults and for kids, and did a lot of thinking and planning around that. Relationships are always important, and very much the emotion was high for families, I think, kids, and also just employees. So we wanted people to just feel confident that they did feel safe coming to work and that we could do this if we worked together. And then of course, technology, as you all know, it fast forwarded really quick, getting things in kids' hands and trying to adapt, to know that if we had in a moment's notice to go online, that was gonna be something that needed to be in place.
So when you talk about any organization, the people are the heart of the organization. And so that really focuses in on the environment and the relationships. And we're not able to achieve success on our own. Every stakeholder has a key role in the success of all of our students in all of our elementaries. So we really wanted to focus in on the environments and relationships and just some key, some different roles that people have had this year, stakeholders have had this year. So what we've experienced, we feel has made us stronger, and we've learned a lot about ourselves and what we can do. So we would like to focus right now, we're kind of salute our students. They are resilient, they are flexible, sometimes more than what the adults in the organization have been. And parents also have taken on roles in their child's education this year, in this past year, that they never thought that they would have to do. And it's really strengthened the partnerships between buildings and the families. And then teachers are constantly working to ensure that our students are getting just what they need. And we've tried all different things, we've been in different models. We have online teachers that are experiencing that for the first time. So we are always just making sure that everyone is getting what they need. Our nursing staff has been in constant communication with all stakeholders regarding the ever-changing guidelines that have been related to the pandemic, making sure that we're all safe and really helping to make sure that all of our mitigation strategies are in place. Associates are wearing more hats than they ever have before. They have multiple hats usually, but this year it seems like they're just doing even more things to make sure that everyone's safe and providing cleaning. Yeah, they're doing a lot of cleaning just to help with the mitigation strategies. Our kitchen staff, again, their mitigation strategies that they've done in individually packaging these meals, it's amazing that the Taher staff has been able to do this, and they do it with a smile. I mean, they are just so gracious. And they've done it for the kids at home too, not just when they were in school, but for the kids that are home. And our custodial staff are cleaning and disinfecting our buildings more frequently than what they have. And it's just amazing that they're able to do what they've been able to do.
So the next part is technology. Like I said, that was a huge, I think we've always had goals to move the one-on-one effort down to the elementary. I don't think we thought we would have to do it quite so fast, but we did. And even though that was a little stressful at times, it took a team to definitely make that happen. So we were able to do our one-on-one devices with optional kindergarten through 5th grade. And then Mike and his team were awesome to work with, and they worked very closely with our administrative assistants and with us to organize documents, to keep track, to put out surveys, and to keep things organized and figure out how to disseminate and deploy these devices so that all of our families could get them in their hands as soon as possible. Huge learning curve for some of us also as teachers. We use technology every day, but not to the level that probably some of us were forced to do very quickly. So our professional development took a quick swing to how to elevate student learning through technology. And now that we had one-on-one devices we could use at school and at home, we wanted to talk about how we could increase student engagement, whether it was in the classroom using those devices or at home using those devices. We really wanted to leverage them to help increase learning and elevate that learning. And then, of course, every year we do something called a clarity survey that's sent out to staff, all 3 through 5, to determine next steps for integration. And I think you'll probably see some different responses this year. We'll see some different responses on that clarity survey because we were able to dive into professional development with teachers, and they have a lot more expertise in those areas. And also for the 3rd through 5th grade students who filled out that survey, I think we'll see them responding, giving us some good feedback on how we can continue working forward with technology with their learning.
And then we wanted to also talk about curriculum instruction, making it viable for all of our students to achieve high levels of learning. A lot of this started with teachers having a real laser-like focus on the learning of the mastery items for reading and math. Last spring, they worked in some curriculum adjustment documents, So we were able to identify standards and essential learnings that were not taught because of, due to the pandemic, and what impact that would have for the following grade level and what we need to do to adjust that. They have done, have continued to kind of go back to those and ensure that we are still making sure that we're meeting the needs of each individual student and really focusing in on those mastery items. And then they've used formative and summative assessment data probably more than they ever have before, just due to kind of that unknown of not knowing for sure what our kids were gonna know coming in. And then after they've been in there for a while, it's just constantly assessing and making adjustments to their plans and their instructional strategies to ensure that we were meeting all of our students' needs.
So I think this next area of collaborative culture, I think this is something I can at least, I think, speak for our elementary team, is that it's something that we really believe in, and it's something we try to model for our staffs. We work really well together, the four of us, because we have to problem solve together. Everybody has a fifth grade, we have to make decisions for fifth grade, we have to be clear about them, and we have to be consistent. So our team works really well together, and we do use that as a model for our teachers, like I said, because that's what we want our teams to also do inside our buildings. We want them to collaborate, we want them to be able to work together to be able to do their best for kids. So I would say that this probably even increased our collaboration as a principal team, but it definitely also increased collaboration in lots of other ways between teachers in grade levels and across buildings. And then I think also our communication with families. I hope that they felt like we were trying to do a good job collaborating with them to support their students. And again, early dismissals gave us the time for more of that collaboration to make sure that we were talking between grade levels, within our grade levels, across buildings, to ensure that we were trying to close some of those gaps for kids.
And as everyone knows, our mission statement is empowering students all students to take charge of their future. So our ultimate goal has been making sure this district focus, this district model has been the foundation for us. And focusing on our results, consistently collaborating, we feel that we've been able to continue to build that strong foundation for our students and empower them to take charge of their futures, even in a year that has been unprecedented. What questions may you have?
Maybe, go ahead. I was gonna say maybe what didn't go so right. So it sounds like you had lots of challenges that brought you together, lots of overcoming obstacles, anything that you do different or?
Things that did go right are things we didn't like. No, I mean, I think we were able to problem solve through. I mean, I think there's lots of things that we had to consider, schedule changes. I mean, just the cleaning in itself and processing through how lunch is gonna work now, and recess took on a different look where we weren't combining grade levels to do recess, and the room setup looks complete. So there were lots of questions, I think, that we had to be answering constantly, but I feel like, again, we were able to do that with our teachers in our building, but there were lots of times we had to go back to each other and say, okay, we gotta be consistent here. What are our thoughts? What are we thinking about that? And then we would bring them to Scott a lot too, to just get that final answer on, you know, what he was thinking, to be able to support what we were going to promise to our families. So I don't feel like there wasn't anything we couldn't problem solve. It was definitely hard and there was a lot to do, but I
think probably the hardest thing for me just personally, and probably Diane too, I don't want to speak for her, but it was the last minute bit of it. Like, you would just get your stuff rolled out to your staff, this is what we're gonna do, and then 2 seconds later it would change and you'd be like, okay, just kidding. I'm gonna take back that mitigation plan that I just, so that was hard for me because I'm a planner and I like to know lots of things in advance. Well, that pandemics don't really.
We did learn a lot about being flexible, and I
Yeah.
think that was hard for teachers too. We had to remind them to just say, yeah, I'm a planner too. We know you wanna know that we're getting this to you as soon as we can. Let's work together and make sure, and so I think we've learned a lot about flexibility, all of us this year.
I think even teamwork beyond just what all staff members are doing in our lunchrooms to make sure all of the tables get cleaned in the manner that they need to get cleaned, and just all of those types of, just like things that you don't really think about, or
Yeah, mine's maybe a bit the opposite of Doug's question. It really is about, what did you learn this year, maybe through some of the information that you brought forward, that you're like, okay, we're gonna keep doing that because it helps us, support kids in a better way.
some of the things that I think are funny that we've noticed are, why have we, like, it's the things with nurse Steph. We don't want kids in the hallways all the time and stuff. Why before have we not just had some of these things in place for, as far as like, we send a kid to the office if they have a hangnail? Like, just those types of things, we can be better prepared so our kids can stay in their classrooms. Some of those health things have been something that I think has been, and we've increased some passing time. We always used to be like, okay, we're gonna go from point A to point B, and just kind of a little more flexibility in the scheduling.
I think for me, the one thing that will stay in place in our building is recess separated. We don't have a huge playground at Heritage, and I will tell you that we had less injuries and less referrals. Just having a grade level outside, because there's not as many people to be in each other's way. So I think that we will continue to do that, and in saying that, that means more duties for teachers and more, because you gotta have more coverage now, because I don't have K1 going to recess together now, I have kindergarten going to recess, first grade going to recess. It's different people to try to serve. So we now struggle with finding, even though it's a good thing to have more space and to run, but it's hard to cover those duties too. So it means more from the teachers, to be able to give us a little bit more of their time to ensure those things too.
And we've had, I would say, even the use of some of the platforms that teachers have used. I have teachers using Seesaw all of the time now. Some of those things that maybe we knew, but this made us do it. And so now we know that we can do it. We know that this is what we say all the time at Northridge, we can do hard things. So it's hard for us for just 2 seconds, and then we can move on and do it. So I would even say some of those things, some of the ways we're communicating with families too.
I agree with that. I think some of that will stay in place for sure. The Seesaw piece of things for the younger grades, and teachers are like, they love to use Pear Deck in their classroom now because they can hold kids accountable and in a way, and engage them in a way. And so, and they're building things and sharing them among their teams. And so fast forward with technology, but it's been good. It's been a good thing for us to have to learn how to do it under crunch time.
And even giving families the option for some of our meetings via Zoom. It's a lot easier for a parent to stay in their office or, to have their lunch at a certain time, but be there during Zoom. It's like, can you come to school at 2:30? Well, that's not always. So again, that's kind of more of a technology type thing, but it allows communication with families.
We've had better success, we think, too, communicating with families for that reason too, where they can take their lunch hour and we can try to circle up. So I think that's something we'll keep in place too, is they don't have to be physically in our building, but we can or maybe, mom's out of town, but dad can be there. And so we can still Zoom mom in out of town and be part of the meeting when, so I believe that will stay in place also for us.
We have so many questions about process, so I'm gonna ask one about product, and there's no right or wrong answer to it. Our expectations were all over the map for our students. Is there anything that they did or performed or achieved that maybe surprised your building teams that you didn't see coming?
3-year-old preschool students who will wear masks. They were wonderful. That was the big thing, was worrying about that, but the little ones have done just fine. And even talking around to different people in different districts who have definitely had different expectations or didn't wear masks, and we really didn't struggle a lot. They've done a really good job with that. So that was surprising, and even I would say some of our special education kids who have sensory kinds of issues and things, that we were able to small chunks acclimate them back into the classroom, and they want to be with peers, and so they would wear them. I mean, so I think we anticipated having more troubles with that, but the kids were great. The adults might have been harder sometimes, you know, we were the ones trying to remember, I have to have mine with me, or I forget, I put it down and forget it somewhere, and, you know, so the kids have been great about that in our building at least.
Yeah, I would say all the mitigation strategies, you know, they're hand sanitizing and way better than you would think. You just, you train them and they do it. And then I would say, I think, Jill will share some of just the growth that we saw from fall to winter in our FAST data was, I knew we were gonna see growth, but then when I really went in there and when I was seeing like the number of correct words per minute that these kids grew, or how many of them are making way more than adequate growth, they're making, so their ability, the students' ability and the resiliency to close a gap they blow my mind every single day with what they're able to do. And it's like they didn't even skip a beat.
Some of it's hard to see, I think, in the data too, because we look at benchmarks. So a kid might have gone from here, here's the benchmark, to here, and you're not going to see that all the time in the numbers, but we tend to focus on growth and looking at that part. So our hope is to see more toward the end of the year that we've gotten them over that part of it. Because you might, you know, the benchmarks, you don't know how close they are or how far they are from that, but we get to see the growth up until the marking point part of it. So we went back and analyzed those things too, like how did the fourth graders, you know, last year do versus this year, and then what about the cohort going forward? And they kept pace or improved for third through fifth. So, I mean, that made, and you know, we compared them apples to apples, fourth graders last year, fourth graders this year, but then fourth to fifth grade, and they did pretty well. I think you would agree with this too. We saw probably most of the detriment to our K-1 population. Those early years for reading are really, really important, and I think teachers have to be very highly skilled to do that. And if you're learning in your home with a parent who may not be skilled in that area to do that, I would say that our data showed us that those years it was probably, we saw a difference there more than anything, but the other ones came back quickly, the third through fifth especially.
I just think one other thing too that would be knowing that in all four of the elementaries, but also all of our secondary buildings as well, a group of teachers that continue to be present every single day for the students and the families when they are still doing 2 to 3 different groups of lesson plans a week for our quarantine kids, and they're getting them in and getting them, the kids that are there, the kids that are, so as I think that is just, and then I think of our secondary, our online people we have dedicated people that have met that learning curve, but the secondary are teaching the ones that are in the seats, and then in their free time, they're teaching the ones that are online too. So I think, but they show up every single day. So I think that is a huge celebration.
My question is, of course, to thank you for all that you're doing, because we know that you have been asked to do an incredible job. So thank you for your leadership to the district and to our students. It's been incredible. My question is one that we spent a lot of time talking about when we saw the benefits of the hybrid model. And one of the things we heard over and over again was class size. And so I asked this question knowing that it's a very complex issue and it's not one that anyone can make any promises about, but we really felt as a board like, wow, that was incredible difference that we were hearing from our teachers and from admins about how our smaller class sizes were making a difference in our interactions with our students and their performances and so on. So I'm curious to see, you know, how have things been going for you now that you're back to kind of your board capacity, and, you know, what are things that we can really help support you through, because we can't, you know, that magic number is not always based on what is the classroom size, but it's very complex. And so I'm curious just to know how's it going and, how can we help support that specific conversation, knowing that in many ways it is quite complex.
Well, I would say we could see an immediate change, coming back, students with anxiety. When the building goes from, it was very calm and quiet in the buildings at half capacity. And rightly so, there's just less movement, less, half the people. When the building comes back together, there's a lot of energy in an elementary building, and you know that if you've ever visited and been there, and so you feel that. So I would say the first couple of weeks were pretty rough with our kids with anxiety. They operate better in a classroom, and we tend to have a lot more of them than we used to in the past. And so, and I would say, for teachers too, that feeling creates, an emotion, for them too. So I think everyone will tell you that we had a really nice little hum when it was half capacity, and we had a lot more energy, with everybody there. We did, like I said, we had to reacclimate some kids, kind of pull them back out and reintegrate them back in, and just more breaks and different things. I would say things have settled in a little bit, but teachers will also tell you they can see every child every day, one-on-one or in a small group, and that's just not possible. In a reading time, to get to 25 to 27 kids one-on-one or in a small group is really hard to do. But they could do it every day when it was, just the half capacity.
I would echo those. It would probably be a lot of the same things that we feel. I do remember that first day back when I said out loud in the office, well, it sounds like a school now. Because it didn't sound like a school, what I was used to that first semester. It was so almost eerily quiet, And then I just remember that day when they all came back, I was like, oh, it sounds like a school now, just because of that hum and that electricity that those kids bring. But I do think it's that differentiated instruction piece is very difficult. 23 in a first grade classroom and 20, it's just, you can't get to everybody every day. And they were able to do that. And I think that academically, that would probably be. Any other questions?
I guess I would just ask, we're always, our primary goal is always policy and that, what else can we do to help you as a board? We can't give you more money probably in your paycheck. We know that everyone wants that.
I do not want more money.
But just as we're doing our process, how can we be most helpful to you? It's always great to have people here presenting and telling us, but also how can we be the most supportive as a board to you, to your teachers, to your staff?
That's a really good question. I would say that I've always felt supported by the school board ever since I've been here, and I'm 14 years, I think maybe is how. This year, listening to each one of you and the questions that you were asking from last, school year into this year, the teachers at Northridge felt supported, and they would come to me and they'd be like, I listened to the board meeting last night and wow, they care. They're asking all these questions and they want to know. So I do think just you guys are asking the right questions and doing what you can. It's really hard to balance a budget and then also do what is best for kids too. So I think if you just continue to balance those two things, the resources that you're given from the state of Iowa, you can only do what you can do with what you're given. But I do just think you continue to ask teachers feedback, and that means a lot to them. When you ask staff feedback, that is very important to them. They feel very appreciated and supported when you're asking or those types of things. And I always feel greatly supported by all that you guys do, and very lucky to have, be a part of this community and this district.
And I think if, you stumbled on the class size piece, I would say that's probably one of the things that's always in the thoughts of the teachers. And I would say probably us too, as we're looking at numbers coming in for next year. But what I do understand, or what we do understand, is this is a growing district. And that's great. I mean, but it also has those parts to it that are ever going to be moving with the population in those pieces. And that's just part of being part of a growing district too. So we trust that you guys are going to make the right decisions for us.
Anything else?
Are there other questions? If not, thank you very much for
Thanks,
coming
guys.
out this evening.
Thanks.
Thanks for
Appreciate it.
coming.
Jill?
Well, I get to start out with the most popular subject, the Iowa Statewide Assessment for Student Progress. That is happening. We've been kind of talking a little bit about it in the last couple of board meetings, but we will be embarking on ISASP officially this Thursday. Our testing window for on-site students begins April 1st. We're hoping to have all on-site students' tests wrapped up by the end of April. Then we have our students who are learning online, whether through a DCG teacher or Edmentum. They will be offered on-site testing beginning the week of April 5th. So all students need to be tested with ISASP, whether they're served on-site or online. And so we will offer an opportunity for students to come into this building in various rooms, set up with the needed mitigation for disinfection, as well as space, as well as meeting the needs if they have accommodations or modifications that they need for the test as well. If then there are students who could not make it in to test in person, we will have a remote ISASP timeline, which will be May 17th through May 27th. And those remaining students will be taking the test remotely. And so there's another set of guidelines, expectations, and processes for that group as well. So by May 28th, almost 2 months worth of time in 3 chunks, we would have all of our 3rd through 11th graders assessed with ISASP. The emails for our online parents went out last week saying, hey, could you let us know? We have this set up, and then once we have those numbers, we'll start making plans then for our remote testing, what that looks like and how we need to arrange for that group as well. Any questions about ISASP? Any of you were?
And then when do the results come back, like next year or something?
Yes, so anticipating that we would receive those results maybe in the summer. We won't have them, especially this year where we are choosing and the state is choosing to open up those last 2 weeks for remote testing. Those reports won't come to us, and we won't have them for this year's data. So we can have those, teachers, hopefully we can have those in their hands in the fall. They can take a look at those and start using that data with what we've had in the spring as they have placed and looked at support for students and making sure it does this either kind of help solidify what we thought in the spring. Is this something that we want to take a look at and that might be different?
And what kind of insights we're gonna be able to get? Because I know, 2 years ago was the first time that battery test was run, and so that probably gives us a data point. And then last year they weren't administered. And then here we are 2 years later and gonna run them again, but then we'll have them for some time. So kind of just what's kind of going through your head in terms of what useful data are we going to be able to get from this, and then how do we put it to work?
I believe this is, for us, I believe this is baseline. I believe 2 years was great. We were able to do it. It was the first time it was administered. They had some growing pains with it as well. Things were changed that would have been in place last year had it been administered. But I truly believe this is our baseline for ISAS.
I was gonna ask that, you, 2 years ago, we had some bugs, as you would with any pilot. With a year gap, is there anything different, better, improved from the learning experience of that delivery? In terms of,
Yeah, I'm not sure that I would say that from what we have seen in just preparation, that there is a lot of things that would be, oh, great, these 3 things are different. There are some differences. I think the thing that, had they been able, or we at the state been able to do this in the timeline, we would be looking at adaptive tests rather than the standard, everybody's taking the same. And that would be a setback is a little disappointing, because that adaptive test really will be more telling for our students and their individual needs and where they are. But I think this is baseline year.
Jill, how many kids do you expect to have to make it up that in May?
For the remote, right now, I don't have that answer. The survey that parents are filling out is due to us Wednesday. And so we have about 330 students online. So we will have final numbers. Well, we hope we can get a good count. By the end of the day Wednesday, we'll make calls. We've sent out a little reminder email, and we'll make calls to also get our names and numbers put together, but we would have a better idea.
Any concerns with that gap? It seems like a pretty large gap between the first set and maybe when you take another test.
And actually, ISAS is usually, it begins in March, and you can run through a little bit of May. They extended it through the entire month of May due to the fact that we knew that they were going to require online students to take the test this year. And they needed to figure out what remote would look like and what could be allowed. So some might argue the point that, well, some kids may have a chance to show what they know even later. So they would have some learning that might occur if they aren't having to show their knowledge until May 17, or some may be taking a math ISAS test in the middle of April. So there could be that pros and cons to that kind of testing date as well. Any other questions about ISAS that?
Jill, did you pass this out, this document?
Yeah,
Are
that's
you
good. Yes.
I'll wait to ask my question. Thank you.
So since we last met, we've had a couple professional development days. One has happened and one will occur this week as far as calendar professional development days. And kind of still related to ISAS, on March 3, we had all staff that were needing to be trained for test administration. So any certified teacher or anyone who would be involved in working with students who are testing had to be trained. And it's a set of trainings through Pearson and ISAS that all teachers must do. We also have a security training that teachers and associates also go through in what test security requirements accompany the ISAS. And then anybody who would have would have a need to work with students who have those accommodations or modifications had an additional training. And that took place on the 3rd, as well as we had a makeup session last week as well. And anybody who didn't have to be there had some building amendment topics working with groups and PLCs on the 3rd. It's not the most riveting training, but it is necessary, and our staff they really do a nice job of being gracious and being there and paying attention to what is needing to be done. And it is interesting when you only do it once a year, so that muscle memory of doing that and then skipping a year also. But we got that completed on the 3rd. This Wednesday, we will have, some buildings will have their staff together to take care of those needed last minute ISAS related planning organization as they open up their testing slots on Thursday. Our K2 teachers, Encore Special Ed Interventions will be working on learning together district-wide, and they will be taking a look at and focused on small group instruction. So that will be all K2 students and some of those special programs and Encore teachers, as well as principals. And Jen Burns is someone who has worked in the district in the past and is coming also virtually, but to support that work for teachers to have some additional learning of what that small group instruction can look like in setting learning intentions, and then what it might look like in order to close that gap. So that's kind of where we are with PD on Wednesday of this week as well. And then talking about, Dan and April, Mrs. Williamson and Mrs. Heitland talked about FAST. So we were able to conclude our winter testing season with FAST last month, have all of that in. Buildings have already started to look at what their data says, not only, and I think you heard Mrs. Williamson talk about that, not only about what the building level says, but what does that say about each individual student. So what we have is what that looks like from that district perspective for all of our students. So our fall assessment data showed that percentage of students in each grade level who were at benchmark was lower than our previous year. You know, we did talk about that in the fall. What we're talking about here too, as we talk about that, this is not cohort data. This is our brand new group of students each year. So right below that though, I do want you to look at and to be able to see, so fall of 2019, we had 82% of all of our K6 students who were at benchmark. This fall, coming in after our March exit, 73% of our K6 students were at benchmark in literacy across the district. As they took that data, worked, had our winter assessments, 82% of our students last year were at benchmark. This winter, we have 78% of our K6 students in the district who are at benchmark at winter testing.
When is that testing? So fall, is that September, October?
Yes, yes. And this year, the windows were widened for that reason. Some districts, they wanted those windows, those testing seasons to be longer, because districts then could choose. Do we want to, normally you would assess in September, but you would have had your students all the way through the end of May. So they made those testing seasons a little longer this year than they have been in the past. So the districts could choose. Do we want to wait a month? Do we want to test later to get a good idea? The same thing with our winter. Our winter extended almost 3 weeks. And spring will be that too. We will have an extension of spring testing as well. So when we simply looked at winter data, knowing where we are now after having our kids at least with us in person a portion of the time or online the entire time. Last winter in kindergarten, you can see I have last winter's percentages there and this winter's. So 92% of our kindergartners, I don't need to read those, you all know how to read numbers. But those are where we sit with those percentages of students who scored at benchmark for our winter testing season in the district. One of the things that we are able to also see within our software, our programming for where our FAST data sits, we continue to be, we have been in the past and we continue to be, because we have been in the past, to be above the Heartland AEA and the state in percentage of students at benchmark. You can see winter total, that's 78%. Our Heartland area schools, 65%, in the state, at 63.
Could I just ask a clarifying question on the chart here,
Maybe.
winter to winter?
Yes.
So if I'm looking at third grade in winter of 2020, 78%, that's the number proficient, is that correct?
Yes,
So then if I drop down to fourth grade in winter 2021, that's
They're
84%. So while that might not be the exact same students because of mobility,
Yeah.
in general, that's that class
yes,
and their improvement. So really the one that took the biggest hit appears to be kindergarten,
Mhm.
which makes sense because they missed a huge bulk of their really hardcore reading
Yes.
instruction that last quarter. But otherwise, our numbers look pretty good in terms of growth
yes.
in those classes of the numbers proficient. I mean, we're not where we want to be, obviously, but I think that speaks volumes to what our teachers did during hybrid and were able to give to students during that semester.
Yes, yeah, no, and not having, yes, you can look at it, not having that matched cohort data, but yes, third grade this year, fourth grade. Looking at those numbers, but speaking about, I mean, that, and Diane and April alluded to that as well, that growth that we've talked about, we talk about that, not just, yes, we have to report percentages, and yes, we look at those for certain things, but what we really talk about in the buildings and in the classrooms are the growth. So what are those things that are happening? So speaking about, I agree, I completely agree that the increase in literacy learning that has occurred from August until February, March time has been outstanding across the board with our elementary students with their FAST assessment. And talking about, how do you get there and some of the strategies, and you've got that on that second page if you turn that over. But some of the strategies and activities that were implemented this year, that whole class fluency instruction, class-wide intervention. So when an entire class hits a percentage where we're concerned about that, teachers will look at that and realize, okay, this is a major concern, a major item in their literacy learning that we need to address as a class. And so they would implement that intervention with the entire class. And then we know that there may be a number of students within the class that may have a couple other areas that they need to have strengthened. They may then be able to benefit from some of that supplemental support that comes from our MTSS framework in supporting those learners outside of the core. Our research-based materials, especially with our phonics instruction, but we use them core, intensive, and targeted, making sure we have those resources. We're not just saying, hey, I really like this when I taught years ago, and I'm going to continue to use it. Very focused on making sure they're using the research-based materials. The explicit instruction and literacy to support the learning. So when that knowledge is brand new, having that explicit instruction with students was used and is very important to solidify that learning so that they continue to build that. And then as they're looking and learning, they move to that kind of discovery phase once they have that. But explicit instruction was quite the focus. Collaboration between classroom teachers, interventionists, special ed, looking at reviewing that data to support not only the core, but our intensive and targeted supports as well. And you even heard about that tonight too in the reports from Heritage and Northridge. Feedback provided to teacher and class-wide intervention. So administrators doing the walkthroughs, watching, having that observation, providing that feedback of what they were seeing, and then having those meetings and talking about what that might look like. The additional benefits, and you've heard this over the last few months, the additional benefits of the learning model and the revised school calendar. that were unintended, essentially, but led to some really nice things. Classroom teachers were able to work with students in small groups on a daily basis. Same thing you heard earlier this evening. Teachers are able to work with students on a more personal level. Interventionists were able to serve additional students on a weekly basis and even be able to go into the classrooms to help support the learning in the room. More frequent data review and collaboration to make those necessary changes to the instruction. Some of this occurred anyway, and we were able to do it even more often because of the structure of the calendar with our early outs that remained in the calendar second semester. So when we knew we had everybody or the majority back in our buildings, which we knew would change some of these things, being able to see students every day, they still had the opportunity to really get together and talk about who do we have, what do we need, and what needs to happen. And then in a week or 2 weeks, come back and see what differences had occurred. A little bit, they talked a little bit too, but just some examples of growth. You know, looking at that, reviewing and planning implementation over 6 months, we have seen grade levels increase in the percentage of students reaching benchmark. Diane spoke about this. We've got the trade, really that trend in the upper grades, that a little more growth from fall to winter than we might have seen in those couple lower grades. And just a variety of those grade levels who had percent proficient increasing in the buildings from fall to winter. Spring Fast comes in May. It will come after ISASS. So at least our K-2 students won't have ISASS in April. But they will be administered in May, and we really do. We look forward to seeing what that literacy data will look like when it comes from that last assessment. Teachers are going to use that spring data in looking at how do we plan for the instruction and supports that our students may need next year. They will use it, they will have it right away. That's the nice thing about FAST. They can have access to it immediately. And then again, knowing that if ISASS is available, they can have that for our 3rd to 5th, 6th grade students. But then we know we're able to take a look at our students again in the fall right away with FAST in September if we wish. So we get that quick turnaround with making sure we know where everybody comes to us again in September.
Can I go back to the graph for just a second? And I want to make sure that, and maybe follow on a little bit Kathy's question. I just want to make sure I understand. And I may be getting lost in the numbers here in a minute, but so just so I make sure I understand what these percentages by grade mean is, so if we've got kindergarten, winter 2020, kindergarten, winter 21, that's the percent of students that meet benchmark.
Yes.
So, I mean, on the average above, it indicates that in 2020 we were 82%, where in 21 we were 78. But if I look at those numbers, the average of the numbers in the winter 21 or the winter 20 column is actually 79%, and winter 21 is 83%. So, is there a student weighting that doesn't tie the average of what we're seeing in the table to the winter of 2021 at 82 and 78?
You don't have the same number of
Okay.
students who are tested.
Okay.
So the N number is different, not only each year, but for every grade level. And for instance, the number of students we tested this fall, most likely the number of students we tested this winter would be more because we've had move-ins from August until February. So even then, our N number changes, not only for each grade, but it can change testing season.
So then does the data tell you then that we think we've in some way mitigated the 3 months of instruction the kids didn't get last year? Does it tell you that we think we're halfway there? What insight do you take from
I'm not sure any data set that anybody, any district in the state has the ability to say to us, if your kids got to 77, you have wiped out 3 months worth of non-learning. Not non-learning, but in-person learning with teachers. It isn't there. We don't have that coming from, I'll say, the experts who design the assessments to say, here's your benchmark, K-12s. And if you're here, you can kind of breathe a sigh, you've got it. I do know it is much more than what's here on paper, because in every building, they're looking at, I have a third grade, I'm looking at my 27. And I can tell you, and I think Diane's kind of this piece of, I was here, I got to hear, well, the line for the reporting is here. But this gap that I got rid of and gained in my learning.
You're well positioned for the next year. Yeah, okay, thanks.
Jill, do you have any sense on, are we seeing any differences in the state of Iowa based on, because everyone in the state of Iowa pretty much had to do what we had to go to the voluntary model in March, but then some schools came back differently in the fall. Do you have any sense on if we're seeing different rates of improvement or performance measures for students based on the model that they chose to come back to?
You know, anything in meetings that we have, we aren't saying, I think I shared maybe in the fall, one district in the metro had reached out and asked for fall data from area schools. And we're saying, okay, some of you, we don't want your data. We don't want to show this. But we have not had that conversation in the winter to compare with even metro schools. That hasn't been that conversation yet. I think for us, that comparison of Heartland AEA state is kind of a nice piece for us to still take a look at, because even Heartland AEA schools, we all had those different learning models when we returned. And we stayed in, for us, able to deliver that with a person. Some of our districts started that way, but then had to go to online in that as well. But we just haven't had any kind of conversation, or even, I guess, I would say there even hasn't been that curiousness, maybe, on districts' parts in meetings that I'm in, where they're asking, hey, you know, do we want to compare learning models? I guess I hadn't thought about
Well,
that.
it's certainly a slippery slope. I mean, you know, hindsight's 20/20 in many things. I'm just curious to know. In the years to come, we'll probably learn a lot about what was the quote unquote right thing to do and what wasn't, and so on and so forth. But I'm just curious.
No,
It's really not.
It's a good question, but that's. But I mean, again, I think we kind of think that we were ahead of the game by being able to work with
There were some
Yeah,
positives,
but-
absolutely.
some additional time with the kids. Like I said, unintended, that wasn't why we chose the learning model we did. We had some benefit to it.
Thanks, Jill.
Do we fast test our online students?
These are
This is
all students.
inclusive.
Yes, great question, yes. All of our students were administered the FAST test.
And I guess I'm just piling on what Sarah said, but you haven't done any comparison between our student population that's online versus our student population that's in school.
Because they're all our students, and we take them where they are, and we get them where they need to be.
I'm just wondering as we think about next year.
Yes. And that would be, that would be data we could disseminate, but we just haven't done that. As well, like our ISAS as well, we could, all kids kind of where we need to be, but it's a valid question.
Well, I think we'd have to be careful with that data too, because there are certain things that are included in the selection of certain families perhaps, and, you know, some of the decisions that they make that are outside of delivery method, but perhaps going to a student's performance. So it's not an isolated issue, it would oversimplify, I think, the conversation.
And as well, we have not had a true, those who started online in August, some have returned. Some who were in person have gone to online for need reasons. So again, that isn't a straight cohort look as well. Our N numbers would be different in theirs, in that set as well. What other questions might you have about our winter fast information? And we certainly will bring, once spring, we will certainly have those pieces of data from the board as well. And I think, you know, we had kind of mentioned in the past, but what we'll really be interested in seeing is what fall of 2020 and fall of 2021, you know, what's that comparison? When we've been able to at least have our students in a building or online for an entire school year, as opposed to the 1920 school year.
You might not actually be prepared to answer this, but has there been a look at math data, and is it a similar curve?
Math, is that what you said? Yes, however, there is a difference in that we don't have fast math at the elementary level. We have that through our materials and that we use for bridges and number corner. So it's not quite as neat
Right.
as this would be.
Other questions for Jill?
Thank you so much.
Good to be back. First topic, COVID-19 update. You know, I kind of put the 2020 March board, so it was kind of like last year. A year ago, it was like, hey, this stuff's happening and these might be some things we want to talk about. And I just, you know, in the end, I think it puts everything in perspective when you look back a year on what we started with, what we overcame, and where we're at now. And the conversation that we're having now, as the presenters mentioned, as you ask what supports, is asking the right questions. And I think that goes from the board to the administration down to the teachers and staff. And, you know, looking at, you know, I think people are asking the right questions. And I think those questions are tailored to what's best for kids and students and why we're here day in and day out. Things put you in perspective within the last year and personally within the last month of really what true leadership is and support is. But when you look at last year, I came with a laundry list of, hey, this something's going on around here and we aren't going to be in school. And we're trying to figure out how to do virtual meetings, how to log on. I was meeting with principal or superintendents 3 times a week. If we could figure out how to log on. I was leading those at that time. We had lots of groups of people giving us resources, feedback, information, new information that we have never in our lives been able to try to digest. And we were just, I think, 2 weeks into this, or 3 weeks. District calendar. It's like, what are we gonna do with calendar? I mean, we're not gonna have kids here the rest of the year. Communication plan. What was our communication plan gonna be? You know, I started with the cabinet and pretty much said, you know, for our consistency, for our model, it needs to feel a little bit more top down than what we're probably used to, because we need to have a consistent message and we need to be able to communicate as a team. Pros and cons of that, as we've learned through the year. But I mean, that was the message a year ago to the first cabinet meeting, was we need to be on the same page, and you're gonna probably feel a lot of top-down decisions up front because we're not quite sure how we're gonna navigate this, but we kind of need to get information and communicate about it. And I look at, in that communication plan, we can learn from it, and we will, and we have through that last year. We had the old Q&A page. I think at that point, it was kind of more cabinet-wise, where internally we had just this page I can't wait to go back to. I really don't want to really approach it at this point, but I'm curious because everything's Google saved. What those first few cabinet admin meetings were like. But we have it all documented to go back and learn from. But those Q&A pages became a benefit, and sometimes it became our own curse in a sense, because our answers, as was alluded through Mrs. Hyland, was changing day to day. So, I mean, community may have had one bit of information one day, and then 3 days later, something else changes, and we had to change that communication. So then we also had to change our hiring practice. Zoom, we're still gonna hire. We're still bringing people into our district through Zoom. We hired administrative positions, teaching positions, and we've had success with all of those positions that we did hire in a different model. So I really don't want to elaborate on the whole year and relive it, but I do want to emphasize the amount of work that the board has gone through, that the administration, our communities, our staff, and our teachers, on all of our support staff. And I think in the end, the questions you're asking tonight are, have the decisions we made had a positive impact on the students? And if so, how much of a gain have we made? We will probably be tiptoeing around that answer, if not hard to even get that answer without some time. I listened to all your questions. They're student-oriented, they're staff-oriented, they're support-oriented, they're small school feel-oriented. But yet, you've heard the conversation that we are continuing to grow. And we will learn from this as we continue to grow to that. Small class sizes tailored with budget we have. Communication to families with the time that we have allotted to do that. Different learning models that we have learned, online, hybrid, in-person, and Mentum versus DCG teachers. Planning. You know, you ask about one thing that, how can a board support, and this may not, those weekly early outs have probably benefited more than we probably think, but yet we're never ready to take that on as a district to have the weekly. But that is something that, you know, down the road, calendar-wise, it's already been set. But weekly early outs do have a benefit if teachers are able to use that to plan at times, look at data, support the classroom they have in place through that process. So enough about topic one. Data, you know, our COVID numbers are same as they've been. Our county numbers are low as they've ever been. And it went from 5 to 6 to 7, so maybe that fourth wave is coming. But our, you know, our numbers are been consistent with mitigation practices that we have in place with majority of our students on site. The numbers probably reflect or the same or a little bit, you know, as when they were in hybrid, but also our county numbers have gone down as well. Our absentee rates for our students as well as staff have aligned. We've been under that number that I would be concerned at with about 11%. We've never reached to a number that we had to turn into the state level for information on absentees. And I think our show of support from our community, you know, I always look at the informal data. I believe we have 2 community members logged on tonight. And we have 4 staff members logged on tonight. I would say 6 months ago, 7 months ago, we had 900 plus logged on. So that in itself is acknowledgement from our community that we're doing the right things, or that they know the decisions have been made and we're going to move forward with them. Online I guess any questions for one or two? I'm not quite sure if I can go back and change anything on number one, but online considerations for 21-22. As I spoke earlier, we have learned a lot about online. I appreciate Director Wilson's comments that people have chose online for a number of reasons. I think it was back in June. I was talking to you stating we as a district need to be looking at an online service to be able to support students not only through COVID, but beyond our years, so that we can support our students that are in our district versus a CAM or a Clayton Ridge. There's also been questions of what a district our size can support for online learning. It was mentioned tonight as well, but our teachers that have been selected to support online learning have rose to the occasion, have done all they can, but it's probably not a model I would recommend us moving forward to with our secondary or even our elementary with our growth numbers. It takes a larger district than we to be able to support that, or a consortium. And right now, there's really not a level of building of a consortium to support online learning for a group of schools. We do want to provide online learning for our students for next year. We do believe that our only option for online learning would be to go through the Edmentum, of which we have chose for at least 40 of our students are in Edmentum for the school year. All for different reasons, but we believe that is the system that we did review early on. I think it was the day before the board meeting in August when we found out there was less flexibility for Edmentum. And that was a interesting conversation that night, but we did have to prepare to provide online with a mix of Edmentum for a full year. And then other students, 330 some students, or a little bit less than that, with our own DCG teachers by semester. So our current online consideration for the 21-22 is to go with Edmentum with their teachers, and having that be an option on an individual basis and not as I don't feel comfortable yet, but as we would with any online programming prior COVID years, it would be a meeting with family discussing what benefits, what we can support for that family, whether it's for health situations, which would probably be more prescribed by doctor or written consent. Family members that may have a critically ill situation that is to their family is too high of a risk to be in a education setting. And then also for other individuals or families that may have a unique situation that the public education system is not the best setting for their child at this time. I'm not coming right now with that recommendation. If you were to ask me and we had it below, this would be the recommendation, but I know the question is asking, what are we going to do next year with online? I want the board to know that we've had dialogue. The superintendent group that I mentioned back in March, a year ago, still meets about weekly. And we're still tackling or asking questions about consistency amongst our education systems and online versus not, mask mandate versus not mask mandate, prom versus prom, graduation, all those things that are coming up. We are still having dialogue, at least I know within the 40-some superintendents that still log on weekly to ensure that our schools are at least sharing of ideas and communicating those ideas. Is there any questions on the online considerations for 21, 22?
I understand you're not ready to make a recommendation, but I know we have, what did you say, about 40 students using Admentum, or in the Admentum program?
Yes.
You know, at some point, it would be good to get some feedback from those 40 families and maybe some data from those 40 experiences, just so we have some perspective on how well it works and make sure that it's the right fit for us, since there are other, like you mentioned, CAM and Clayton Ridge and some other options as well.
I do believe a survey is going out because I had received one to fill a survey out for Admentum. But we will be, or I don't have it yet, but we will be receiving feedback for, we had indication that we will be getting information for a survey. If I read my parent emails better, I would be better understanding of where I'm going with this. The other thing also, Ryan, that we're trying to work on, Director Carpenter, is our CAM numbers and our Clayton Ridge numbers do take all of our student dollars for those. You know, if we can provide that service for those dollars and have them be able to still participate in our activities and graduate from DCG in the end is what our ultimate goal is. But we will be getting feedback on Admentum as that option, as well as there's other districts that have been using Admentum that we can get feedback from them as well.
Do we still have students in the others at CAM and at, people who had already started there then just stayed for this year too?
Yeah, we had a couple that have came back. We'll try every year to provide that, but sometimes they're familiar with CAM.
Right, yeah.
And so that's what's working for them. And so.
Scott, when does, just those 40 that are in there now, when do they need to make a decision for next year with us already looking for registration?
So our goal, once we have isolated how online is going to look, in person is going to be the way it is now. Our plan is to send a survey out the end of this year to get interested parties of online and then start those processes of meeting with them and preparing for their interest for next year or not.
Can I ask one thing? Pre-COVID, how does that 40 number compare to what there is usually or before COVID? So you said there's 40 doing Admentum now on a normal year. What's that normal?
That would attend CAM or Clayton Ridge?
Yeah.
Do we know? I want to say 6 to 7. But those are probably more education connected.
Okay.
Academic reasons versus health. I think health was a key piece of choice of Admentum this year that in other years Clayton Ridge typically is not going to be selected for health purposes.
Scott, I remember when we were looking at Admentum contract wise, I remember there was kind of a sliding scale based on the number of students, or at least I think I remember looking at that. Do we anticipate, I'm sure that they've learned a lot in their process as well, and obviously want their business model to continue working. But is there any indication if that's something that we're gonna have to negotiate as well, or are we gonna have some sort of flexibility, or do you have any sense there?
I think this is my time to pass this over to the person who's in charge of Admentum, who I believe has probably been cringing with some of the stuff I've been saying, but positive for the students. So I would like to have Mrs. Van Workum, who is in charge of Admentum.
I'm in charge. I have the luxury and opportunity to work with Admentum and our Admentum families in delivering this. We do have a little fewer than 40 right now as we filtered that out, but we had a conversation with Admentum, and some of the conversation has been that the pricing that schools received who went with Edmentum, it was because it was a negotiated price due to COVID with our AEA. We have verified, we were told that if we just made the decision before the end of the school year, that my question was, are you going to honor that or is this going to go up? They will honor that. So we will have a this year price rather than a different price. Should we choose Edmentum as our vendor or partner for online learning, they will keep this year's price, which is, I think, impressive. They don't have to. They are in the supply and demand kind of right now as well. I have experienced things with Edmentum that I will say I may not have realized that would be there. We knew they had their own teachers. We knew they had live sessions. I see the communications that go back and forth. But I have their teachers reaching out and saying, hey, I have a concern here, this student, these assignments. Can you call me? And they are asking, I mean, not only are they calling and talking to the families or emailing or texting, whatever that family choice is, they're reaching out to the district partner to say, what does it look like? Can you help me know your student, your process? I've been very impressed with that because they could continue to operate in their silo with the families. There's also been recently an opportunity for some of the students to participate in a tag enrichment time through Edmentum. And that has been a benefit to students that maybe would not have had that in another setting or things like that. So we are in conversation with them about what does it look like? Can this be something that is feasible for our district? And Mr. Grimes does not know this, but there is an email in my box saying, hey, what about this date? So that he and I can be in a Zoom call with those two representatives. And so there will be those things that we do want to make sure, we have the answers to. The thing that will be a benefit, should we use Edmentum this fall, is that they are not behind the 8 ball like they were last fall. Our Edmentum students didn't start right away. We did have that glitch with Edmentum was hiring 100 teachers a week in some areas to get that going. So that little hiccup and our families, let me tell you, our families were so gracious when it was happening. They were so gracious when we were having those conversations and communicating back and forth. So.
Do we have a feel for, of those just under 40 and 300 and whatever we have? So was that 370 families, whatever, for students? Do we have a feel for how many are thinking they will continue? How many are thinking they will come back? Is that an ongoing conversation? Is that something that in the next 7 weeks of school or 8 weeks that will become a conversation? How is that envisioned so that we can not be behind the 8 ball and that we have an idea? And I'm thinking about, someone asked a question about with registration, secondary students are, starting doing that process. What if we have some secondary students who need to do that and are planning to come back? Has all that started?
So we did talk about what does timing look like for a survey to go out. I did mention that maybe we could not wait until August to do that. Last year was different. And so I think, I heard Mr. Grimes mention that hopefully by the end of the school year, maybe even in May, that survey could go out to families. But I do think those kind of 3 points that Mr. Grimes talked about in what does that look like for online learning? Is there a medical issue? Is there a family, not just about a student, but a family member who may have a very severe health issue that would keep a student from being here in person? And then I think that third example was, there are students where that traditional setting isn't conducive to learning for a variety of reasons. And what does that look like? And then how do we want to frame that? I know there were some districts, and I think I heard Mr. Graham allude to that as well. There's some districts that is a conversation that happens where before it was, I check a box and I can choose I want this model or the other. Where now is, what are the conversations that need to happen between the district building and those families about why?
Do we have a feel if the state's going to require it as an option next year, like they did this year?
They are not requiring it.
Okay, thank you, I didn't know. Thanks.
Have the kids, I was just gonna ask, the kids, the high school level, they elected courses for next year as assuming they were in person, or have they gone through that process? They've gone through that.
Yes.
I think the other piece is these conversations with the family, and I just think it's either at Mentum or in person.
Right.
It's not at Mentum, I want a DCG family, I want to be online, support this, and in person. And I think that's the dialogue that we need to have with those families, and we need to make sure that is clear in any survey that goes out, that it's at Mentum online for semester or year. We haven't made those decisions yet. And then also your other option is to be in school.
Semester would be an option. Is it different than it was last year?
Anything's possible, Director. That's our the specifics. We don't have looked at yet of what that could be if it's a breakdown by semester.
So when it comes time for us to make a decision, we would have all of those details in that breakdown. And one of however many options to choose to move forward with. Okay, thank you.
That is correct.
Maybe just one more, and maybe we could look at maybe a little broader scope of the COVID things that you've built over the last year. And some of those things probably make some sense to unwind, but then I think that there's some things that maybe is worth some at least discussion. So things like increased sanitization. Maybe there were some, obviously that was something that we needed to do as we were dealing with the pandemic, but I think others might argue that there was some other things where I think we're seeing influenza cases down and maybe some other things that I'm probably not able to rattle off. Maybe Marco, you've got a better sense of some of those things in terms of what you're seeing go out the door in terms of prescriptions. But I think that there's some things here that have a cost tied to them that we should probably wrestle with a little bit as a district and say, hey, is the juice kind of worth that squeeze relative to those items? And then things just like, what are we going to do with masks in the 21-22 school year, and are buildings open to parents again? And, just all of those things that, we're going to need to deal with. And maybe just some sense of when does that happen? Is it over the summer? Is it yet this year?
I think some of that stuff's going to be over the summer. As I listen to other districts and as they're planning for next year, I think it's getting through this year with masks required. Still using the same mitigation practices and social distancing as we can. And then looking at requirement of masks options for next year. The mitigation will be next year. We have had internal discussions about some of the things we put in place. Microbial sprays, I think that's 8,000 a month that we are doing for preventative maintenance. Our question is whether we continue that, the frequency of it. A lot of the mitigation practices we did put in place, you're right, there is a cost to those, and we're going to need to dig into all of those things we put in place for the year and weigh one way or the other on what we need those things. I think what it has shown that you've seen is I've not heard a whole lot about influenza. I haven't heard a lot about other illnesses. Our absentee rate is probably average lower than it has in the past, but we're not going to be able to require masks just to keep our influenza down. So those are, I think, what you're wrestling with and that we're going to need to wrestle with. I think a lot of districts are probably waiting until closer to the end of the year, summer, before we start deciding on what mitigation practices need to happen for next year.
Thanks.
Next item is the possibility, almost recommendation, of looking at our transportation bell schedule. I know it's been alluded to for the past few months. I think last month, Director Weedman asked about updates on bell schedule, from what I heard. And it's really the only one we can advise at this time for the year. Due to the changing and shifting of the 7th and 8th grade building coming online, 5, 6, shifting to grade levels, we are looking at moving Oakview, if approved by the board name, starting 30 minutes earlier than the rest of the district. They would start at 7:45 and release at 2:45. Staff hours would be 7:30 to 3:30. This would reduce 5 bus routes. Currently, we would need to increase 5 bus routes in our fleet, just the shift alone for next year. So we currently have to hire 2 bus drivers from retirements or resignations, but we would need to increase 5 bus routes than we currently have. We would need to then, at that point, look at our busing, because we would be, as a district, we would not have enough buses to handle activities. We would probably need to go out and increase our fleet if we were going to maintain our current bell schedule and having all schools aligned. We probably need to increase our mechanic or support at the transportation facility. And we would not have enough spots up front for even all of our parking of the buses in our facility. So those are our all growth items, but it does make sense for us to shift starting times. This is a common practice of many of our metro neighbors and districts. The other option is to shift all the other buildings except for 2 to a different time than what it currently is. Like moving all the elementaries one way and high schools all a different way. We can do it that way too. Our ultimate goal right now with this, as we look at that bell schedule, is what's the percentage of the population that we're impacting and try to reduce that as small as possible for that first year. And then do a study on the bell schedules and is there reason for us to shift elementaries to a different time versus secondary. And when I talk elementaries to a different time, we're actually talking now K-6. The challenge we have that other districts don't have when they do move to different bell schedules is our biggest bell schedule challenge has been the 9-mile road between our communities is our biggest hurdle, and shifting bell times through that. As I've alluded and mentioned what we're looking at, we do know that there'll be some pros to this for families, and there'll be some cons to this for families. But our positives for our district fiduciary responsibilities is that this is probably the time for us to take a look at a staggered bell start time in 7th and 8th grade, Oakview being the first school that will have a different time than the rest of our district. We do know there'll be a gap after school, and we'll need to work with Mrs. Phillips and Mr. Wolf, as well as some staff, on how do we support students that will be waiting for practices after school. Our ultimate goal in the end is to try to increase, are there other activities or clubs, other opportunities that we can help provide students after school in the future. But right now, we do not believe we have the capacity. We need time to work for our activities after school and prepare and plan for that once this if this recommendation is approved by the board. And I'd recommend that it be brought to the board at the next school board meeting. Either that or we need to hire 5-7 bus drivers in a short amount of time and maybe bring some more buses for you to approve in the next board meeting.
I think it makes sense. I think there's maybe just a question about, how many routes do we run and, what time of the morning are we putting the first kid on the bus? I mean, gosh, 7th and 8th grade kids are changing a lot and sleep's important. We start to clip that back too much, it starts to have probably some impacts on a lot of other things that are, like you were alluding to, unintended consequences. So I think if we could run efficient routes and not having kids get on the bus at, sometime before 7 a.m., that maybe probably be helpful and help families out a bit.
So it's gonna help traffic as well, just the volume of traffic at that intersection for high school kids coming through, and delays a little bit, spreads it out a little bit. That might help. I'd be curious, just as we start thinking about communicating this and start getting planting the seed with the district, what's some of those pros and cons for us to be prepared to address for individual families, so we're ready for those? It'd be nice to have those.
I think the question is you're taking 7th and 8th grade babysitters, possibly out of the home, not going to call them babysitters, older family members that may be able to get their sibling on a bus. There'll be a gap between those students for some of the families and the younger students getting on the school bus. After school, these students may need to get picked up from school, although they can all have the option for busing. But some families prefer to pick up their child, and this may be offsetting their child versus another child in another building, or work-related. They may not be able to get off at that time to be able to pick up their child. The 7-8 building is 100% bus and will be. So any parent who is unable to pick up their child, those students have an opportunity to ride the bus, whereas that is not the case for all of our elementary students. Those are the things up front that we see. The other things is after school. If a student were to take the bus home after school and need to be back for practices, that is the responsibility of the family or that child. We will not be running a shuttle at this time for these students. So let me give you the example. It'd be the same whether we were on the same bell schedule or not. When we moved to Meadows, we ran a shuttle from Meadows to Dallas Center. Families in Grimes picked up their child at the school. This is the same thing for the 7th and 8th grade building. Grimes parents will be picking them up from the school after activities, which should end at the same time they currently are. It's just that time in between, we need, as a district, there'll be some costs for us to supervise activity students. Another benefit we do believe we, if given the opportunity, is our show choirs, which we're looking at possibly moving to a 7th grade show choir and an 8th grade show choir. Currently, those are together with 120 some students, but we do see this as an opportunity to break 7th and 8th grade into show choirs. And we believe those show choir students that could be after school. So they could do show choir after school between 2:45 getting out and 5 o'clock or whenever that activity is done. Versus now they show up an hour before school for that. So there is some built-in time for some natural activity for students as well as jazz. But I think what we're going to have to work with is our jazz band, show choirs, as well as our sports in 7th and 8th grade. They're really going to have to work together on times. Last thing we want to do is to piggyback students at 7th and 8th grade and have them choose between show choir or music and sports, that we want to emphasize that if you're in show choir, you can still go out for an activity, and that we would offset times or figure out how that can work between activities and sports. So as you can tell, there's been a lot of dialogue between pros and cons. Financially, it's probably about $125,000 savings a year, just shifting 2 grade levels, and that's just an estimate of those 5 routes.
Scott, one of the things that, I'm not sure who mentioned it, but it was the early morning care and knowing that there might be older siblings that are doing that. Have we thought about the ripple effect on that side of things? So if your older sibling is gone, but I don't have anyone to provide care for my children for that 30 minutes, I need to leave for work, for example. Right now, it's pretty clear at the elementaries that, there's a clear drop off. You cannot come before 7:45. Have we thought at all about potentially providing some of that care or coverage in a more reasonable fashion, perhaps, for some of those families that might be in that pinch if we do go to this?
So that was brought up, I believe, in the cabinet meeting when I wasn't at that meeting with some of those conversations or questions about early child care and pickup and drop off times for the elementaries. We can consider that. The question we have is always going to be cost of supervision, teacher contract times. Those are always the things that teacher planning times before school. Those are things we need to consider, but it has been brought up about possibility of different drop-off times in the morning. As a previous elementary principal, I do know if you open your drop-off time to 7:30, then they're going to want 7:15, and then you move some. I'm just saying from experience.
We also
Solid
have
drop-off
small
time.
Provider partners who depend on that. Sure, before that care.
I feel like this is one of the growing pains, for lack of a better way of saying it, that this is a shift that we're going to eventually have to do. And whether we look at, because there is research to support that secondary students going later and elementary students going earlier is really probably more ideal than this, but I also understand that fiscal responsibility is really important also. And if we have our secondary students going later, then there's no childcare after school either. So we're going to hit that on either end. And I think the most important piece of that is probably communicating to our public as soon as we can so that they have between, if we're voting on this next month or in May or whatever, that they have then until August to make those plans, to contact those providers and to take care of those responsibilities that we all have as parents to find coverage for our students.
I have one question, sorry, got excited there. So we release at 2:45. Are these gonna be the same buses running those routes that are then gonna get back to the elementaries to pick up those routes? Or are these gonna be separate bus drivers and routes?
They're going to be the same bus drivers and routes. Not as many affected for that shift as you think, because it's a smaller population. So we were trying to get 15 to 20 minutes first. And then Mr. Wolf was like, I can only do 30 to make that work. I mean, we did try to crunch it less so that we had less of a gap, 30 minutes. I know where you're getting at is ensuring that they're done with their routes to be able to go through and pick up
Yeah, that's what I was trying
the
to
next.
figure in my head is, yeah, okay.
We'll make it work. Any other questions that you would want prior to the next board meeting? Of a recommendation, which would be very, very similar to this.
I just echo Kathy's sentiment of early and often communication on the issue.
I think now that it's been presented at a board meeting, it's open, it's public, we can put communication out. I'm just preparing that if they know that the decision has not been made yet, you will be getting some feedback. And so will we. And I would always direct you, any feedback you get as a board, if they have other questions and you feel you're unable to answer those, please direct them my way or to Mr. Wolf. Permits within the district. Now, I would have presented one of this out last month, but if you've looked at the numbers, we had 22 building permits in January and 24 in February. If you look back to January and February for the past how many years? Our largest was 14. One year we had 70, but I mean, that's still, our total permits this year of 149 is the largest number we've seen. So they're coming. And I do know with communication with the city that they are concerned about the number of lots they actually have. You've heard me communicate. So they're at a trend now where the lots and permits are going, I mean, there's not enough for the amount of people that want to be in our district, Grimes and Dallas Center. There's land available, it just needs to be put out for sale. So you look at our economy, you look at those numbers, people are still choosing to be here, and we're making great decisions on that way. Class size guidelines, same as last year. Actually, is the same since 2011, 12, except back in 2010 to 2012 or 17, we rounded up on those numbers by 1. So we always went 1 more than what the board goals were. And then we added that number on in 2017. So we're recommending the same numbers for continuation of that for next year as well. Any questions on class sizes?
So you got rid of the range. Is that to help with neighborhoods?
No, we still have the range.
Okay, so
That's just, that last number is kind of the top number. We still have the range, and we still have the range on the enrollment documents that we use, and there's still the same range that we would communicate out if asked. The challenge, as I said a few years ago, preparing for heritage and then not having grade alike buildings, when you have sections of 2, 3, and 4, the lower end of that range is really not part of the range anymore. So if you take a look at one of our class sizes right now that might be sitting towards the top number, and I'm thinking of maybe a first grade class in Dallas Center, where we have 2 sections in that building, and we're sitting at around 24, 25 per class. We're sitting around 50. We take that number and divide it down to 3, or we add a section, it moves them down to 16 or less per class. So those are numbers we learn to love in hybrid. But if we look at all those splits with those numbers, we're going to be challenged by cost to be able to maintain some of that. What we do for classes that are on that bubble is we have conversations about other types of support, either bringing in an associate, like this year we did hire an associate for kindergarten at Dallas Center Elementary to support that class. We will continue that until we see a point that, either contact open enrolled students that are in that grade, see if they will attend a different building, or if there's new enrollment for that class, we have capped it and had them go to a different elementary within our district. So we do try to maintain those numbers under, and we take a look at where students could possibly be for next year. Right now, we're taking a look at some of those classes that have left Northridge and has moved to another building, and we're looking at bringing those back or home resident type numbers and ensuring we still have the capacity per grade to be able to handle those.
At that point, is that parent choice? So if someone had to move and they're in Dallas Center or at another building, whatever, and
We contact parents and ask if they'd be interested in doing that.
it's if they're interested, they don't.
If they're already placed,
If
yes.
they're already placed, right?
Any questions? I think I just answered the enrollment projections page also. But anyway, staffing update. As you saw, we had 11 of the elementary positions posted last Monday, and that application's closed today for internal. So we're in the process of the internal transfers. There'll be more postings based on what teachers move to where, into what positions. And you'll see the staffing document will now start having a lot more transfers towards the bottom of it as teachers move from different positions and different schools throughout the district.
Can I ask one question? And I don't know if we're ready to talk about it yet, but we've heard numerous people come in and talk about the benefit of the smaller class size. When do we start that conversation of how do we get to where we're not at those 27, 26 at the maximum?
I think the question is whether we're finding success academically with those classes.
Right.
Versus it's nice to have smaller class sizes. For us to financially shift those numbers down as a test or experiment to see if we're going to make greater gains with smaller class sizes, it's cost about $55,000 to $65,000 per section that we were to add. Right now, if you were to say, what are the 2 classes that you'd recommend moving? I could see 2 right now that the board want to say, we're not happy with those numbers. That'd be a cost, that would be a shift of $125,000 just to make that change. If you want to start looking at reducing some of our upper grades from class sizes to 27, because we are not making academic gains for those classes, then we would look at providing first other supports through associate support through those first. And then we would look at reducing those by a section. If we were to take a 5th grade class or a 4th grade class, sitting at 27, and we add a section, those 2 grades will now become less than your K1, 2 grades. And now it's just going to be a spiral effect of why are we having class sizes of 18, 16, 17 in 5th, 4th, and 5th, when our other class sizes are sitting at 20, 21, 22. The last time I looked at, and this was a while ago, I took it back to the original class size change back to 2011, 9, 10, because I think the board was like, how can we get back down to where we were? I can go back to those numbers, but I believe it was about a $500,000 to $600,000 staffing increase that we would need to maintain those smaller class sizes a year.
So I guess, is there a way we can tell without trying? I'm not saying we need to try this right now, but academically and seeing the success of it, is there a way that we can tell at this point without trying, a random 3rd grade class and seeing their numbers versus the rest of 3rd grade, or a random 1st grade class, having them go a whole year with the smaller class sizes versus the other? I'm not saying that's what we need to do by any means, but without doing that, is there an easy way
We have that data because every year in every grade, we probably have a class that is less than other classes. Because we have that data of class sizes for the past 10, 12, 15 years of what those numbers are. I can go to research, but it typically does not support smaller class sizes. An effective teacher working with curriculum that is focused on student learning is just as effective for a class of 24 than it is for class sizes. You'd have to get down to the range of 15 or less for it to be a sizable impact for a class size.
Scott, one of the things I heard you say that I didn't maybe fully understand that I appreciate you bringing to our attention was this idea of when class sizes did get larger or we had concern or, for whatever reason, hiring some additional classroom support is an option. And so, while I know that maybe that doesn't necessarily impact student learning, it perhaps reduces some burden on the classroom teacher. And to me, that's part of the conversation here too. What can we do to make sure that we're retaining staff and making them feel like they are connecting with their learners and an environment where they feel like my stress level is here, but now I have some support and it's more down here. So I feel like that has to be part of the conversation as well. I mean, student learning, of course, number one, but number two, like, what are we doing to make sure that we're retaining these excellent teachers that we've been able to have? Because we may not be able to compete in all factors of where's the best place to teach, but if a new teacher knows, gosh, if I do go and have to come into a classroom of 27 and I need it, I'm going to be able to get that additional support. And so I guess I would be curious to know, like, is that a question we proactively ask of our teachers? Is this something that you would need more instructional support inside in your classroom and more behavioral support? Like, when is that point where a teacher has to raise their hand versus us being kind of proactive at the district level?
Well, we have those conversations consistently to the point where it probably never gets to the board level because we as superintendent and administrators are the ones that need to be deciding when a classroom needs support or doesn't need support. So we do that without bringing anything to the board. I can think of 3 examples that has been within the last 5 years, but it's never presented to the board as this is how we're supporting classrooms. We just do that from a classroom building, principal to superintendent communication on what staffing needs are. And then those are recommended by really the big picture of the board is looking at the enrollment summary that you get each month. I highlight concerns or increases and decreases, but you still have the range. You can see where that bubble is or how close it is to it. The other thing we need to remember now also is that those numbers do not take into effect students that we know are possibly moving out of a grade, transition of students, open enrollment, placement may change if needed. I mean, we do everything we can by grade once they get to a level of how can we disperse some students or what do we need to do to get that into either the board goal range or what more supports do we need to provide that grade level beyond a teacher itself. Other districts, as they've got to these situations, this would take a lot of planning, but one thing that they do is they have hired a halftime teacher that just came in and taught during the core. And so that is that's a different venture, but it works with larger districts than we're currently at. We're kind of in a bubble size-wise that we don't have as much flexibility for that. So what they would do is they would take the classes they currently are at, and they'd have 3 teachers for everything in the day. They'd have 4 teachers for math, science, and reading, and social studies, or really it's math and science is the ones they broke into smaller sections during that time. So you could have a teacher hired that could do 2 periods in one grade, 2 periods in another grade, 2 periods in another grade. But the challenge with that is some teachers don't sign up for that type of teaching. And I think most that have moved that way have probably worked away from that when they could.
I think we all obviously want class size to be as small as is feasible. And I think I'm looking at actually the enrollment document that we have, and many of our classes are under the top number, which I feel good about. And I do know that if you're, in that class that is going through at the top number, you're probably there K4. And that, or at least maybe starting at 3rd grade and 4th grade. And if we are able to support those teachers, I think that is a solution that we can look at. And then maybe as we grow, and moving 5th grade may make a difference too, because then we have all of 5th grade together. And so making those choices, there's economy in that scale when
There
all of
was,
5th and
'cause
6th grade is together.
We reduced 2 teachers in 5th and 6th, our current 4th and 5th grade, due to bringing our numbers back together. And if you look at those, they are beyond, they're still below the board goals. The other thing I think I pointed out maybe 3 years ago is we had I can go back to it, don't hold me to this, but I think we had 10 sections that were either at or above board goals in the whole district. Last year we had 1 or 2. And so that goes up and down depending on what classes and what sizes are by what grade. So I mean, you guys as a board have reduced the number of sections that are at the top or closely over the top of board goals. They're just not to hybrid size classes. So on staffing, I think we've hit 3 of my topics in combination. I'm going back to staffing because we will still be, there's still a couple positions in secondary due to growth that we'll need to post. And then I do have a number of activities, coaching, music, positions I mentioned last month that due to growth and size, we will be posting as well. All of those have been communicated to the negotiations team, and then also looking at our, all of them go into our effective budget. The other thing you have to always say when you talk about class sizes is what things do you want to give up to have an impact on class size? Any questions on enrollment? I mean, just looking at my topics, any questions? I covered the enrollment, I believe, through this. COVID update, permits, guidelines, staffing update, enrollment projections. Any questions on those?
Just, I don't know if this is off topic or not, the early out Wednesdays, is that still on the table for next year? And is that gonna affect? Or would they just get out, or they'd get out earlier at the 7-8 building? If those were
Should
to,
we get out of them?
just, got it, okay.
Thank you for bringing that up. That's one more thing to keep in mind on Wednesdays.
Were you gonna talk about facilities?
Yes. I have updated 150 pictures in the folder, and I will send that out to you with a link. I could go through them now, but I am choosing not to. Facility update, 7-8 building through our naming, and I'm looking at the names that came back Oakview was a unanimous choice of the other two for our parent population and everyone but students. Students, it was the top choice, just not by the same margin. I think it was 2% off of a different name. So we will be recommending that the 7-8 building be named Oakview.
Oakview Middle
Oakview,
or just Oakview?
Oakview,
Okay,
like Meadows. Oakview. Oakview School.
that's why I asked, I wasn't sure.
Looking through the project, as you'll see through the pictures, still north to south. A lot more storefront is up. A lot more of the, you'll notice in the science rooms that our cabinetry is going up as well. So you can kind of see one science room is mostly completed, and then as you move, you'll see cabinetry not in the room at all. Everything is replicated in that building 6 times. So one science room will look like the other 6 science rooms, and then just moving that from north to south. There is some kitchen equipment you'll notice going in, flooring going in, as well as tile in the restrooms. Another color is up. First time I saw red. So there were some red walls in the common areas. If you go through the pictures in order for the 5-6 building as well as the 7-8, it's almost as if you enter through the main door, and then I'll walk you through the admin office, and then I'll give you a view of the main hallway, student door, and then I'll walk you through pretty much one wing at a time, and you'll be able to notice the wings I go from north to south. Gym, some of the key areas you'll notice is the gym is painted, lights up, all of the basketball hoops and everything is in the court. The flooring is going in. So you'll notice the intricate lattice floor that is going down at this point. You also notice the size of the, take you above the locker rooms, size of the locker rooms as well. And then I think I go down the band choir hallway, take a look outside back from that. That would be your activities door. And then I'll walk you up through the, kind of take you a look through the, you get a good view of the inside of the courtyards, both of the courtyards from upstairs as well as downstairs. And then the learning stair and teacher's lounge area. So I still am open to provide tours if you'd like. I think Ronnie and Sarah went through a tour and gave a good insight of the layout of the building. But more than happy to provide any of those opportunities if you would like. 5-6 building, we did move the classrooms into the new wing. I took pictures of the new wing and it looks the exact same as the other 4 that we have in that building. And then took some pictures of the, for those of you that went there, there's no longer a science is gone. There's no language or that hallway. Yeah, it's just one big open room that 6 classrooms are going to be built out of. I took you into those pictures of the locker rooms that they're going to start demoing because we have not used those locker rooms this year. So they're going to add that early prior to, it was going to just be during the summer for the locker rooms. And then I take a few pictures of the band, the choir room, the hallways back to the multi-purpose room. A lot of their staging is in there currently. Those are also the 2 areas that they'll be able to complete out quicker. I think a priority was that updated wing and then the 6 classrooms that they'll be redoing in the center. The naming of the 5-6 school, there's conversations around the Dallas Center Grimes Middle School term. With your 5-6 building, that survey question did come back. The data was not a high enough percent to move forward on that yet. I would believe we need to do some work and get some conversations with Dallas Center and Grimes, and maybe just get more information on thoughts and views on it, because I did not feel it was as overwhelming to rename Dallas Center, Grimes Middle School, or even Dallas Center. So for the time being, we will look at gathering more data for those schools and then bring that to the board later, but it would not be proposing to our board to changing those names any earlier than a year from now, as we need to align with the Department of Ed.
It would seem, unless there's a big push within the community for that, since there are only 2 buildings and they are each already identified within the community and the district, that unless there's a big push, it seems like an added expense, because you think about all the expenses that go along with changing the name, that unless there is a reason, if we add a 3rd building there at some point in the future, then that may be.
I think the reason to ask the question, it was brought up
Right,
in conversation around, just want to spend more time on that than go with that survey and change it. And I want to respect all the history that's going on in the district and make sure we're doing those things for the right time, I would say.
I think in other districts, they've kind of preserved one building usually with that name, you know, like whether it's Waukee or Riverdale is usually a building that still carries Waukee Elementary or whatever it is. So that situation wouldn't be exclusive to us.
But we're keeping just the 5-6 building. That's what we shall call it.
No, we're calling Dallas Center Grimes Middle School.
We are gonna call it the middle school. Okay, I'm just being clear.
I can't even
The
take
minutes
that
say
off.
5-6, and I just wanted, I was like, I'd
Okay.
like to talk more about that.
We can't even take that off for the Department of Ed. If we change the name, it's going to be a bigger change than that. High School Meadows, we still have the catch-all of looking at everything. Over spring break, we did have the, usually the initial walkthrough with the architect, as well as the electrical engineer and the other engineer, mechanical and electric. So both those engineers. We did a detailed walkthrough through full high school as well as Meadows, as they are looking at structure, they're looking at requests and needs. So that was also with our own buildings and grounds crew, and then Sean with our heating and cooling, to see what things we have done already, how that aligns with the big picture, the phasing in of the sprinkler system, if that's an option. Really, conversations with them is what's happening above the ceilings and how can we remove some of that with efficiency, and that also increases the height of that building, because that building is a shorter structure, but how can they add height to that building as well as through that renovation? So they'll be coming back with how their initial design thoughts, and then we'll take that for feedback for a smaller committee and kind of see where we go from there with pricing. This is the normal stages of a project such as this. Future presentations, and that's all I have.
Are we doubled up on future presentations because we're making up for COVID, or are we going to stay doubled up like this? I'm just curious, because I mean, I think they're an important part of our meetings. I also like our meetings to be as, reasonable in length as possible. But I also definitely want to hear all this information. So I'm just, and I can't remember if we're doubled because of COVID.
We've doubled some of them, but we've also increased some of our areas.
Right.
So I think the teaching and learning student services, that's an add, but we also typically did not have presentations in June or July. So we will need to really look at next year overall and see how this presentation done.
Thank you.
Scott, does it make sense to have Jeff come next month, since that's something that's going to be approved? If there's any questions that we have for him, or I don't know what he's going to be presenting on in May, if it's different than the recommendation.
He could come next month. I believe he'd come even if it was a separate presentation just for the recommendation. Yeah, we can switch those around. We can probably, all those are important for next year. But we can see what we can do.
Any other questions for Mr. Grimes? If not, Michelle?
Looking at the public budget comparison and the monthly revenue expenditure summary, I just want to point out to you on the revenue and expenditure, near the bottom under CARES, gear, and other COVID-19 funding, there's $556,037. That's the revenue that we have received thus far from ESSER 2, part of the CARES program, and then the FEMA from FEMA Project 1. Just over $400,000 was received in ESSER 2. We utilized those funds to cover costs associated with COVID-19, with FFCRA pay, and with substitutes. So that's the revenue and expenditure summary. Looking at the next page at the public budget comparison report, you'll notice that we are 75% through the year and at 69.47% of published budget for instruction, but at 82% in that support services area that we keep talking about every month. You'll notice a new column where I recommend a proposed amendment. The support services area is an area of throughout all of the budgets, all of the funds that most of the mitigation and most of the technology has been purchased for COVID-19. And so we need to amend in that area, and that will be my recommendation. Looking forward at the next page, you'll see that actual amendment that I will ask you to approve later tonight for publication, and then we'll consider it at the April meeting, and that is in just the one area of total support services to $14,069,934, with the reason for change, pandemic mitigation and other repairs done in that area. Do you have any question about the amendment? If you recall, it does not impact taxes whatsoever. It just changes the number that you publish in the newspaper. Okay, next, the Moody's Investors Report was issued to us on March 17th after an interview with Moody's in early March. You'll remember last year, we told you there was just probably no way we would be able to hang on to the AA2. But at that time, I had no idea there would be a global pandemic. So now only accounting geeks really love to go through this report, but there are some interesting facts in there if you want to look through it. And if you notice, one of the ways that they come up with their justification for a rating is they use a rating methodology and a scorecard. And that's on page 132 or on page 5 of the Moody's report. And if you look at our scorecard, we actually scored AA1, which is awesome. But there are so many moving factors in COVID-19 that they upheld our AA2, and we're very happy with that. And you'll see that reflected in the bond today. So before I go on and talk about USDA, I do want to talk about the report of sales. There is nothing more exciting than bond sale day at the school. Not all would agree, but I think so. And so I have a couple different pages in front of you. I start with a landscape copy page,
And that is the savings analysis for the bond that you refinanced. That's the $4,115,000,000 general obligation bond. It was originally a bond from 2012. This is the Series B bond. You'll notice it came in today at a true interest cost of 0.61. I've done this a long time and I've never seen anything that low. So phenomenal savings for the taxpayers. Looking at that landscape page, the savings analysis is $160,281, or present value of the semi-annual savings is $156,431 for the taxpayers. So that is the refinance bond.
Hey, Michelle, can you remind me what the interest rate on that was prior to the refinance?
I would have to go pull it. I don't have it right in front of me. I'm sorry. I don't know.
But much, much higher than that.
4-ish.
Yeah. Thanks.
Looking at the new sale, the new GO bond sale, $1,135,000. The true interest cost on this one, which is a much smaller issue, was 0.90204. So again, under that 1% mark. The interesting thing about both of these is we had a phenomenal number of bidders. We had 6 bidders on one and 8 bidders on the other. It just shows you the banks are really working hard to invest in this market at this point in time, really put money in a safe place like schools with a AA2 rating. So you will take actions later tonight to approve the opening of the bids, accept all the bids into record, and then pass a resolution authorizing the sale of bonds. So that will happen for both of those 2 issues later tonight. Finally, I included for you a letter that I got from the USDA about our food service program and their actions during the pandemic to feed all children. We are not a district that is normally approved for the summer feeding program because it is based on free reduced lunch. But we were approved based on some factors of low-income housing in specific areas of the district. And our food service people jumped in with both feet and really made it a phenomenal success. And advertised it on social media, which caught the eye of some people at the state who passed it on to the feds and earned us this USDA recognition. And so they'll be honored in a couple of different ways in some publications from the USDA, as well as this letter for the board and the community to review the actions of the people that work in our food service. We want to thank them for all they've done. That's all that I have tonight, unless you have further questions.
Thanks, Michelle. Are there any board member reports? If not, we can move to old business. The first item in old business is the second reading of the board policies, both the November primer and the December primer. Is there a motion to pass those for the second reading?
Move Carpenter.
Second, Hickok.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes, it's unanimous. Moves us into new business. And the first item under new business is resolution authorizing the issuance of not to exceed $1,135,000 of general obligation school bonds and levying a tax for the payment thereof. Is there a motion to approve?
Move to approve, Wills.
Second, Pajaro.
And this one is a roll call.
Director Wilson,
Yes. Director Pajano,
Yes.
Director Rance,
Yes.
Director Hickok,
Yes.
Director Weidman,
Yes.
Director Wills,
Yes.
Director Carpenter.
Yes.
So this is the pre-levy. This isn't the actual sale of those bonds. This is just allowing us to collect this tax in this budget year so that we have the money for the payment.
So the second order of business is opening of sealed bids for Series 2021A general obligation school bonds not to exceed $1,135,000 by Superintendent of Schools, Secretary of the Board, and Financial Advisor. Sir, maybe I should be pausing and seeing if there are questions before I jump right into it. If not, is there a motion?
Move to approve, Hickok.
Second, Carpenter.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes, it's unanimous. And up next is the resolution to review and directs the sale of Series 2021A general obligation school bonds per recommendation of the superintendent of schools, secretary of the board, and our financial advisor. Are there any questions on that one? If not, is there a motion?
Move to approve, Weedman.
Second, Wills?
This one is also a roll call.
Director Wilson?
Yes.
Director Pajano?
Yes.
Director Rance?
Yes.
Director Hickok?
Yes.
Director Weedman?
Yes.
Director Wills?
Yes.
Director Carpenter?
Yeah.
Motion passes, it's unanimous. Opening of sealed bids for Series 2021B, general obligation school bonds by superintendent of schools, secretary of the board, and financial advisor. Questions? If not, is there a motion to approve?
Move to approve Wilson.
Second, Bajano.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes, it's unanimous. Resolution to review bids and direct the sales of Series 2021B general obligation school bonds per the recommendation of superintendent of schools, secretary of the board, and financial advisor. Any questions on 2021B? If not, is there a motion?
Move to approve Hickok.
Second, Carpenter.
This is roll call.
Director Wilson?
Yes.
Director Pajano?
Yes.
Director Rance?
Yes.
Director Hickok?
Yes.
Director Weedman?
Yes.
Director Wills?
Yes.
Director Carpenter?
Yes.
Motion passes, it's unanimous. Resolution authorizing the redemption of outstanding general obligation school refunding bonds, Series 2012, dated February 1st, 2012, and directing notice to be given. Any questions? If not, is there a motion?
Move to approve, Wills?
Second.
Weedman.
This one is also a roll call.
Director Wilson?
Yes.
Director Pajano?
Yes.
Director Rance?
Yes.
Director Hickok?
Yes.
Director Weedman?
Yes.
Director Wills?
Yes.
Director Carpenter?
Yes.
Motion passes, it's unanimous. Approve the name of the 7-8 facility as Oakview. Are there any other questions on that one?
Move to approve Wilson.
Second, Bajano.
All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? Motion passes. We have the first reading of another set of board policies, approximately 203.8 through, well, you can see it all listed there. It goes up and down, but ends at 203.9. Are there any questions or commentary on the policies?
I just had a question on 204 being rescinded. Is there a reason why we're rescinding that policy? The meetings of the board.
Was that the one that was just not in line with IASB?
Yeah, I think this is
Yes.
redundant.
Yeah, it's
Redundant, okay.
redundant, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, these are back to the ISB, as they went through our board policies, we're trying to be back online with those.
Other questions or concerns? If not, is there a motion for the first reading?
Move, Carpenter.
Second, Weedman.
All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? Motion passes. Approve agreement with Premier Furniture and Equipment for the 7-8 building furniture package A. Is there anything you want to say about that?
It's just the continuation of the process, once you hire, and then enact policy or the procedure.
Yeah, we talked,
Maybe just one quick question. Did they guarantee delivery dates?
We had delivery dates set in there, yes.
Okay.
They guarantee it. If there's on a ship, probably not.
Sitting in the Suez Canal as we speak.
We have a date, yes. We do have another follow-up for that.
And they were able to, where I'm going is we know that there's been a good deal of backlog we've missed that, just aware that dates have been a struggle relative to furniture. So just wanted to make sure, A, we were having the conversation, B, we were given some measure of guarantee by this bidder compared to the rest of the field that we feel quite certain that they're able to meet the dates.
Yeah, and when those dates were put in for, so we did ask on dates on install, and it was later in July, and we moved them up earlier. They knew what date we needed as put in by. Yeah, that was a enforce of our project manager to make sure that's getting done as well, not project manager, but construction manager.
Yep, fair enough, thanks.
Is there a motion to
There's a
approve?
motion on the floor, so I'm gonna second the motion.
I'm sorry, who had a motion?
I,
Mark.
I'm not sure I want to know, I'm kidding.
Rescind motion.
I do.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes, it's unanimous. Approve the agreement with Wanger Music for 7-8 Furniture Package B. Is there a motion?
Move to approve Hickok.
Second, Pajano.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes, it's unanimous. Approve contract change order number 3 for the 5-6 building. There's a number of items listed there. Are there any questions?
Move to approve, Carpenter.
Second, Wilson.
All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? Motion passes, it's unanimous. Approve publishing of the proposed budget amendment for 2020-21. The one that Michelle just talked about that does not impact the property tax. Is there a motion?
Move to approve, Wilson.
Second, Weedman.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes, it's unanimous. Approval of the class size guidelines that Scott discussed earlier.
Move to approve, Pajano.
Second, Carpenter.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes, it's unanimous. Approve the 2021 service awards.
Move to approve, Wilson.
Second, Wills.
All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? Motion passes, it's unanimous. Certified approval for the 2021-22 fiscal year. This is what Michelle talked about last month.
At the work session.
Yes, so this is the proposed budget for next year. Is there a motion?
Move to approve Hickok.
Second, Carpenter.
This is also a roll call.
Director Wilson,
Yes.
Director John,
Yes.
Director Hance,
Yes.
Director Neva,
Yes.
Director Weedman,
Yes.
Director Wilson.
Yes.
Director Carpenter.
Yes.
Motion passes, it's unanimous. National Teachers Day Appreciation Day Proclamation. Is there a motion?
Move to approve, Pajano.
Second, Wills.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes, it's unanimous. Approve teacher election list for the 2021-2022 contracts.
Move to approve, Wilson.
Second, Weedman.
All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? Motion passes, it's unanimous. Move to deny the 2021-22 open enrollment in application for EB due to the application being filed late with no good cause.
Move to deny Hickok.
Second, Wills.
All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? Motion passes, it's unanimous. Financial statements, is there a motion?
Move to approve, Pajano.
Second, Wilson.
All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? Motion passes, it's unanimous. Board commendations, is there a motion?
Move to approve, Carpenter.
Second, Pajano.
All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? Motion passes, it's unanimous. Written and oral communication, next regularly scheduled board meeting is April 26th. And then there is a collective bargaining meeting that the administration is attending on Tuesday. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn. Paterno.
Wilson.
All those in favor say aye.
All right.
Aye. Motion passes.